just Suzanne Caskey and Zach are in the room at the moment. Doug may or may not.
Great.
Joe is gonna be on remotely.
Correct, and Debbie Kelly is
Have a quorum with 3, right?
4.
I think we need 4 for 4.
Is a quorum, and we don't need a quorum,
Okay,
because we're not taking any action.
because it's just a position.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Despite that, and I bring up something else that's not on the agenda.
Well, do you want it to be part of the meeting? The meeting hasn't, I don't think
No, we haven't started.
we
the
haven't
meeting, so
started
we've
the
got
meeting,
4
so if
minutes.
it's off the cuff, sure.
I would like to talk to you all sometime soon about, I keep seeing, now I'm seeing ads in the paper for houses featuring outdoor wood burning fireplaces. That we should address sometime and see if that's still appropriate.
Good point. Did I bring it? Yes, I did bring a pen. I will make a note of that and are those ads for houses in,
One of them was at 531 Warzone, which I thought was probably his part of my work. But I called the county. I called the bill, no, I didn't call the building, I called environmental health first, and they said, no, that's in the city. So I don't know where that is, but then I sort of got to run around and you know, it's legal. At this point, it just may be inappropriate now.
outdoor fireplaces? Yeah.
Outdoor wood burning
Okay.
fireplaces.
Bonnie, can you resend me the agenda? The one I'm pulling up. My link, it goes to the 27th.
Thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, I'll just bring that to Suzanne's attention and see if my guess is it's probably not community development department's realm, but we'll,
But even if it's environmental health.
Yeah, we can chat.
Should be discussed.
Yeah, we will chat with- bring it to their attention and see if there's a good strategy for dealing with that. Thanks.
Okay. What are we waiting for?
For one, I think Zach is getting the,
Oh, we're just waiting for a couple more.
folks online. Hopefully, yeah, Joe Mason should join, and Debbie Kelly indicated that she would be joining, although noted that her internet connection might be a little bit flimsy and she may have to come and go a bit or just leave. So hopefully she'll be able to join.
I'm here.
You
Can
are,
you
okay.
hear me?
Yeah, since you don't have your video on, you don't appear on our screen, but she is here.
Right.
Great. Glad you are here.
I'm saving bandwidth.
Good.
We can feel you're out there.
Yeah.
Did you get it?
You know, I have a hard copy of the agenda if you'd like it. Would that help?
Got it.
You did.
We'll wait for. We have Debbie, do we want to wait for Joe or
We
Joe?
can give Joe a few more minutes, but Doug Throm is the only other one we might be expecting. Joe Kraybacher and Chelsea are out for sure.
Let's just give it like 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, it's just 5 o'clock straight up, so.
Jamie Goal, is that somebody?
Go,
That's our son.
Yeah.
Okay.
joining, okay.
Chelsea,
Yes.
are you all here to hear this discussion?
Specifically.
Okay, good.
Yeah, they've been very diligent about paying attention and
You're
Being
gonna
a-
start speaking to me on the street soon.
being a part of the discussion, which is great. Yeah,
Good. I say let's get started.
Yeah.
Okay, give me 1 second here.
Welcome, everyone. Today is Tuesday, October 21st, 2025. And today we have a Pickens County Planning and Zoning regular meeting.
No, it's a work session.
Work session, sorry. And tonight present we have Debbie is online and we have Suzanne and myself in the room. And do we have any commissioner comments before we begin? Any comments from staff?
no staff comments this evening.
I guess we will begin with our comp plan work session.
Great, thank you. Hannah Hunt Wander is joining us online, and she's gonna start us off, and we're gonna tag team the presentation from there.
Thanks, Ellen. Hannah Hunt Wander, Senior Long Range Planner. Thanks for continuing with us on the fourth work session of the comprehensive plan. The intent as we move through these slides is
Alright.
to
Can you hear us?
I
Hannah
can.
Hunt?
Can you? Yes,
Sorry.
can you hear me?
He wanted to jump
I
in.
can't hear you. I can't hear you well. Could you speak up or can the volume?
Really?
Turn up?
Can you hear me now?
Hang on 1 minute.
Okay.
Good.
I'm doing the same thing that I was when we did the sound check, so
That's better.
Your sound is good, Hannah Hunt. We just had, the owl was not participating very well. Can you hear now, Suzanne
Yes, I
and
can.
Zach? Okay, go ahead.
I can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for sticking with us. This is the fourth work session for the comprehensive plan. This is all under the broad umbrella of the Vision 2050 project, which is, again, kind of coming back to the values of bold climate action, balanced economy, rural preservation, equity, and affordability. And then tonight, the intent is that we dive into the chapter related to community housing. That will be within the built environment chapter, and we've consolidated policies to be one section that's just all the policies related to community housing. And just a reminder that all this input received from P&Z and the work group that we've been working with along the way. We've done a series of open houses, a lot of engagement recently. All of that will be incorporated into a final draft of the comprehensive plan. So as we
Hannah Hunt, would you just let Bonnie know when you want to go to, there you go. Next
Sure.
slide. That's perfect.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep. So briefly, we've shared this throughout the presentations, but especially for folks in the room. So kind of the broad process has been about a year and a half ago, we started going through a full data effort, providing a baseline for us of existing conditions with demographics, socioeconomics, kind of our county existing conditions, inclusive of existing plans that the county either manages and the caucus master plans, kind of all that information feeding into the framework of the comprehensive plan. We then went through and consolidated all of that and organized that into different topic areas, which are now the four main chapters within the plan, and dove in deeply into each of those topic areas with focus groups, with roundtable discussions with different subject matter experts. There was an open house that happened about a year ago that was really focused on the kind of big picture goals of the plan and establishing that community direction. We worked through the winter to hone that policy direction, working with a community work group who were folks who were a part of the Growth Advisory Committee, as well as caucus members who have been working with us throughout the process to make sure that we kind of stay on track and help provide feedback to staff. The Planning Commission has been along all the way, reviewing the documents and revising and again, giving direction to staff. Through this spring, we honed the goals and success measures for each of those 4 chapters. We presented a draft of the full comprehensive plan that was released this summer, and we did a variety of additional data analysis. One of them was about intensity, and that will be a supplement to the comprehensive plan as an appendix. There's also a water conditions report that's a supplement to the plan as an appendix. So that was integrated into this large document over kind of winter and spring. And then as that plan has launched, that draft plan has launched, we've moved into another round of public engagement for folks to be able to see what's written within those policies, provide feedback. There's been a digital way to communicate that out through Story Map and through a survey for us to get more feedback. We're right now in the yellow, so P&Z work sessions, going through each chapter of the plan with a fine-tooth comb to be able to make sure P&Z provides final direction to staff with the draft plan, and then we will consolidate that to a final draft that will then be referred out and then move through the public hearing process with planning and zoning. So if we jump to the next slide, thanks for running, Bonnie. Just quickly, the responsibilities of the different parties who've been a part of this process. So broad community giving feedback to inform this process. The Vision 2050 work group has been a steering committee and provided various perspectives as we move through these different processes of the planning approach. P&Z is ultimately the body that the state asks to, gives the authority to formally make and adopt the plan, and then acts as a recommending body to the BOCC on the plan as well as on land use code at large. And then the Board of County Commissioners ultimately will approve the plan and will move forward. Additionally, the building and energy and land use code updates, which will be the subsequent stage after this policy document is adopted.
Great. Next slide. Great. So over the last several months, we've embarked on a countywide engagement effort to inform the community and get input on the comprehensive plan. And we've used several tools, in-person pop-up events across the county. We've attended several caucus meetings over the last month or so and gotten good feedback there. There's some targeted stakeholder outreach that has occurred and will continue to occur. And then over the last 2 weeks, we have hosted several community mapping charrettes across the county with a focus on housing. And we're going to give you a little more detail about what was entailed in those charrettes and the input that we received. in a minute. So next slide, please. So the next several slides give some background on the housing element of the comp plan before we move into the policy detail discussion. So the first draft of the plan incorporated housing policies as a cross-cutting theme across several chapters. And we discussed this earlier. Basically, housing was addressed in the built environment chapter, in the natural environment chapter, and in the community and economic health chapter, and in the regional approach chapter. So because housing does really is a cross-cutting theme across all of those elements of the plan. But next slide, please. We've since consolidated all of the housing policies under one heading in the built environment chapter. So if you have your hard copy plan there, this change hasn't been made in the hard copy plan that you have yet, but the consolidated housing policies were included as attachment A, I think, in your packet. So they are all in one place now, just for ease of reference, just to really make it easier to find all of the housing specific policies in one place. And that was some feedback that we got from the Board of County Commissioners. They were going back and forth between chapters and said, can we just see it in one place? So that is a change that we've made, and we'll be walking through that specific area within the built environment now, that's specific to housing. I'm going to turn it back to Hannah Hunt to give a little bit more background, and we'll tag team from there. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Yeah, so just to be clear on the definitions, as we tee up the conversation. So when we're talking about community housing, the key words here in the definition are intentionally planned, developed, preserved. So that's inclusive of existing housing. Meeting the diverse needs of the community at all stages. So workforce, seniors, families at all ages, all income levels, to be able to live and thrive locally. So really supporting affordable, but also accessible, available long-term, and with support for the community fabric. So this is really a broad definition. This language was also pulled and maybe not pulled, but this language was referenced from the ballot language that was the mill levy that went through related to community housing in the 2024 ballot. So wanting to make sure that we're clear that this is the kind of inclusive definition of community housing. When we talk about affordable housing or employee housing, this would be a subset of community housing. So this is talking more specifically about specific to deed restricted housing that's targeted based on guidelines based on income or occupancy. So just to be clear.
And also,
Ellen,
I'll just
jump in.
What affordable housing or employee housing is the definition that exists today in the land use code for affordable housing and employee housing. So
correct. Yeah.
It exists today.
Yeah.
As the broader community housing definition that we'll include in the plan that will be carried forward. Thanks.
Yes. And so on this slide, then just a kind of recognition, right, that community housing as a broad community value. And this has come forward most specifically recently through the 2023 public satisfaction survey, where the county does a broad statistically significant survey and says, hey, what are the top issues for our county? And that came forward with affordable housing being incredibly significant as an issue to be addressed, as well as managing growth, which is really kind of a proxy for rural development. So that's something that really acknowledges there's need for affordable housing, but there's still a tension with threading the needle with how do we preserve rural character while also supporting our goals of affordable housing. And then, as I mentioned, the 2024, the mill levy That was ballot issue 1A that passed last year with 59.9% approval, just an underscoring community sentiment that support for affordable and attainable housing is really important to our community. So as we take that and move that forward, the comprehensive plan is a place where we aim to address, from a policy standpoint, the issues related to housing and facilitate from a policy standpoint, housing that's affordable, that's accessible, and broadly attainable. So that's some of the context that comes into this discussion as we set up the policies that are laid out within this chapter.
Next.
And if you jump to the next slide, so again, just a reminder that the foundational direction for the comprehensive plan and this Vision 20 process really broadly was the Community Growth Advisory Committee final recommendations report, which provided a long list of recommendations to make tweaks and adjustments to our county land use code in support of our community values. And this Appendix J, which is specific to affordable housing recommendation, is on the screen. And this is where that phrase is written out, where it talks about the growth that we do want as a community, according to the Growth Advisory Committee, that meets our community values, is more affordable and middle market housing. So just to kind of go back to this other place that's really the impetus for moving this policy direction forward is grounded in that CGAC report. And if you go to the next slide, Bonnie, thank you. So again, just some of the context is that as a rural county, like many other rural counties in Colorado, we face constraints, natural constraints from a geographic, from a topographic, from an environmental standpoint, that make development of any type challenging, that make locations where development is appropriate of any type challenging, and specifically for delivering housing that achieves our goals of rural preservation, meets the requirements from a water standpoint, and also achieves equity, makes that even more challenging because there's not that many places where we can really densify or even infill where we are able to kind of meet the needs of our environmental limitations. The strategy and the policy that the county has in place currently has been to locate community housing within the urban growth boundaries. And City of Aspen has an urban growth boundary. Basalt, as you know, has an urban growth boundary. Snowmass just has a municipal boundary. But the terminology that's in the existing policy has allowed for some level of housing outside the UGBs when it preserves what is existing and when it fits the character of the area. So just kind of a note on what policy is in place to date. But as we've talked about, increasingly jobs and development activity and economic activity primarily related to large residential developments, large single-family residential developments are increasingly extending into rural areas of the county. So this is kind of a changed condition that new pressures are emerging that challenge the limits of what we currently have from a housing supply and what our commitment is to preserving rural character. So I think kind of in summary, this is saying we've got limitations of where housing can happen. We have a policy in place that really restricts that within urban growth boundaries. And we still have values that say we want to preserve and protect rural character. So we're trying to thread the needle and say, what are strategies to address housing, but being responsive and really respectful of our community value of rural preservation. So if we go to the next slide, we've seen this before. This is the character zones that talk about the rural to urban continuum. So on the left, on the remote side, there's strong presence of the natural environment. There's limited to no services. It's predominantly federal lands. The rural area is agricultural. There's some large ranch lands. There are some large residential in these rural areas. Semi-rural has more access to services. There may be water districts. Often there's wells that sits just adjacent, just outside of our established urban growth boundaries. And then that semi-urban are where there's more services within established urban growth boundaries, but not within the municipalities. And then urban would be within municipalities, and then resort recreation are ski resorts that are, just looking outside the window, kind of right up the mountain, but adjacent to our towns. So again, just the kind of characteristics to illustrate the continuum of these character zones throughout the county. And as we go to the next slide, so the Growth Advisory Committee, as we hold in that Appendix J, identified the need to consider limited, low impact, and small scale community housing outside but adjacent to urban growth boundaries to help meet the growing pressures from an affordability standpoint, to maintain community values and meaningfully address the community housing crisis. So the conversation really tonight is with all the housing policies, but specific to the location of community housing, are what types of community housing or residential development are appropriate and where are they appropriate. So that's the discussion that was also a part of the community open houses in Aspen, Carbondale, Basalt, online, and then in Snowmass, which really addressed a lot of the question. And I'll pass it back to Ellen.
Before you go, may I ask a question of Hannah Hunt?
Yes, please.
Yes.
The last slide.
What you were just saying was limited low impact, small scale community housing outside, it says on the slide, outside the UGB. But you added, but adjacent.
Yes. Yes, and we'll go through in the policy. That was a little bit of foreshadowing of the policy language, but yes, the Growth Advisory Committee said, yes, we support housing within urban growth boundaries. That's been the policy to date. We want to continue to prioritize that, but in certain conditions that are outside but have access to services, are able to be have transportation. Services are able to meet the water demands, that there are locations outside of urban growth boundaries where that may be appropriate.
Okay, I understand that last part about help meet growing pressures. I was wondering if it's appropriate to add to this small scale community housing outside but adjacent to.
This isn't the policy language. This is just kind of describing what the what the growth committee said. But yes, adding the language but adjacent to would be would carry through the intent of the growth committee's recommendations based on their criteria.
Okay.
And we will be able to look at the specific criteria for locations outside of the UGB, and
Okay.
if there's a need for refinement there, we'll go there. So, and we're not quite there yet, but, we will get there. So keep that in the back of your mind.
Okay.
Yeah, this is just kind of, again, setting the context for the policy language that we'll dive into. But yeah, thanks for that question, Suzanne.
So, yeah, as I recounted a few slides back and Hannah Hunt just referred to, we brought the conundrum of what type of housing is appropriate and where to these open houses that were pretty well attended. And we held them in Aspen, Carbondale, Basalt, Snowmass Village, and also had an online webinar to allow people to weigh in. And we got a lot of good feedback that we'll summarize in a few slides here, but just wanted to, we actually brought a few, just for, for fun, we brought some of the maps and boards that were used in that interactive mapping charrette at all of the open houses, and we thought maybe we'd ask you to interact and go ahead and participate in a charrette, but I don't think we'll have time to do that. But as you can see, we identified residential development types, and we'll provide a little bit more detail on slides, but yes, and Jessica is our Vanna White, is that anyway? Yeah, so we identified residential development types that range from caretaker dwelling units to small residences less than 3,250 square feet to large residences above 5,750 square feet, duplexes, triplexes. We had a range of housing types for people to look at and consider when they were looking at the type of housing that might be appropriate in the county, in the unincorporated portion of the county, in the incorporated areas, and then to put actually literally take push pins and identify those types of housing in areas where they might be appropriate on these boards and maps. So
On those big ones, the bigger than 5750. Did you get to one that called gobsmacked or?
we did,
Homeless or-
we didn't call gobsmacked, but we could add that as part of a policy policy terminology definition. Large home, gobsmacked. Good catch. Anyway, so the open houses were pretty well attended, and we're gonna walk through some of unless you have questions about the boards that Jessica took, made a big effort to bring up here so that you could see them. Basically, we used the Transect that you're familiar with as one tool for people to weigh in on where different types of housing might be appropriate. That was one of the exercises that was pretty well attended. And so the next slides go into some of the community feedback that we received at those open houses relative to to housing. And this first slide, there's a lot of text here, but basically to summarize, protecting rural character and limiting growth in rural areas continues to be a predominant community value based on the feedback we received. There's a need to increase affordable housing supply. There were comments about the fact that wages have not kept pace with housing and living costs. There should be better use of caretaker dwelling units for local occupancy. And there was, Suzanne, a strong sentiment against large second homes and short-term rentals displacing residents. So that was definitely something that came to the forefront as part of the discussion. But as you can see in the second subheading there, protecting rural character and limiting growth in rural areas is still really a predominant community value that was echoed in these open house comments and in the feedback. I'm not going to go through all of these bullet points, but really it was clear that our challenge is to address the tension between that desire to increase the supply of affordable housing and protect rural character. I think everybody acknowledged that. It's clearly something that our land use policies are going to have to work harder to make sure we're supporting all of our community values. And there was also a fair bit of input from some of the caucus representatives that came to these open houses about the need to respect local caucus master plans as a component of achieving those community values in the comprehensive plan. Lots of good discussion there.
That to me is really important. Caucuses have always been very important to me, and I have lived in some of the areas of the county where the caucuses are the strongest. And
Yes,
to make them feel like they're not heard when there's some, there was in the land use code, a threshold question of, does the development meet those, master plans, and has it been looked at by the caucus areas? Does that still exist?
the master plans are, as you know, the caucus area master plans are advisory, but there are sections, there are types of land use reviews that look for consistency with the caucus area master plans. So it's consistent, an application doesn't have to comply with, but we are looking for in several types of applications, we're looking for consistency. Under a location extent review, then that local caucus master plan has a little more application in terms of, how it affects the outcome of an application there. But so, yes, we do still refer to the caucus area master plans, for several of the land use applications that you review. And as you know, I think the Board of County Commissioners and Planning Commissioners have always taken those caucus master plans and caucus input seriously. Now, whether they are always implemented as recommendations are made in those caucus plans, not always, but they are definitely considered. That's been my experience. So this next, any other questions before I move on there? Okay. And also, Suzanne, I think Hannah Hunt and I have discussed the fact that perhaps in the master plan, we want to have something, some specific recommendations or at least acknowledgement of caucus plans beyond what we may have in there in this first draft.
Yes.
Really to acknowledge them, and speak to them a bit more than we do at the moment. So
That would be great, because
Yeah.
those are hard to work on. They're hard to work out, and they're heartfelt when they are written. And I would always hate to walk away from working with a caucus on a master plan and then have them sense that it didn't pay any attention to it. It's the bedrock.
yes, you're absolutely, yes, agreed. And as you know, I've been involved in a lot of those caucus deliberations and all the heart and soul that goes into those plans. So I do understand.
Thank you.
So this next slide really speaks more to the location of housing and the feedback we got there. There's significant support for density still within the urban growth boundaries, and support for housing near services outside of the urban growth boundaries. Let me see, support for creative, right. So, there's also support for creative small scale housing outside of the UGBs where it fits the character and services are available outside of the UGB. Clustering within or near infrastructure and transit may be appropriate, as the draft policy that you're gonna see tonight, suggests. Support for smaller but diverse housing types, was expressed, in urban and semi-urban areas within the UGBs. And broad support existed for caretaker dwelling units within existing neighborhoods, as long as occupancy is enforced. There was a lot of conversation about the fact that caretaker dwelling units are a viable type of affordable housing, but because there's a lack of enforcement of existing deed restrictions, occupancy, they're not necessarily addressing the need that they were intended to address. So we definitely heard that from several people. There was also, we have had recommendations to expand the 1,000 square foot caretaker dwelling unit size limitation to 1,500 square feet. And that really is intended to better accommodate a small family. 1,000 square feet is perhaps a bit tight, so we've had several recommendations for a slight expansion there. And, that's a snapshot. That's certainly not, comprehensive. It doesn't include all of the comments we received, but I think that summarized the gist of the comments we received about the type and location, for housing within the urban growth boundary areas and outside of the urban growth boundary areas. And the current land use code, does allow for both housing within UGB, the preferences for housing within the UGB, but it also currently allows for some housing outside of the urban growth boundaries. And this just gives us a little more detail and criteria to better address the issue. And so we'll get into the details here in several slides. And I'm going to turn it back over to Hannah Hunt to walk through those residential development types and the details that the participants in these housing open houses were looking at. Housing open houses. That's hard to say.
Right. So for folks that are in the room, these are some of what's on the boards that are close to Ellen and Jessica. But there was a lot of different information that was put forward, kind of boards describing existing conditions, a snapshot again of the community growth advisory recommendations, the broad goals for each of the chapters, and then this series of questions related to residential development. And so the first series was broadly, what types of residential development are most appropriate in Pitkin County broadly? And then the next board on the next slide is a question that asks about, okay, within these different typologies, small single family, duplex, triplex or quadplex, CDU, larger single family, and then some different types of multifamily, which would be below 10 units or above 10 units. Then the question was, where are these residential development types appropriate within these character zones? So again, kind of remote being far, predominantly federal and public lands where there's very limited development, all the way to resort rec on the right. So this was an exercise with pins where folks were asked to identify what might be appropriate where. And then the next slide, we went into more specifics using a map of the county. If you jump to the next, go.
We have a question.
Does that line, the houses, the pictures of the houses across the top relate to this? Is that the summation of the answers?
No, and maybe the boards that are where Ellen can show, but that was kind of like, here are the options running across the top. And then if you take a yellow pin, you could put that anywhere on the board. So the options running across the top are just of these different types, where might they be appropriate?
And we'll show you some photographs of the results of the mapping activities and where those dots showed up.
I just meant that people wanted small houses in rural and remote. Oh my gosh. But I understand that.
No, yeah, it was just.
Yeah, that was kind of the key. And then, so this was another board where the key of the different options that you could use as a pin are on the bottom left. And so the same exercise, but asking which of these different types would be appropriate, and then mapping that onto areas more specific within the county. So using the county map as a place to locate where that type of development might be appropriate or not. And so if you jump to the next slide, so this is a slide, so this is showing from Aspen, from Basalt, Carbondale, and Snowmass Village. The green dots were where The prompt was put green if you want to see more of this. The prompt was put a red dot if you'd like to see less of this type of development, and then put a yellow dot if you'd like to see more regulation related to this type of development. So in the top left of each of those boards, and again, I think Ellen's got that in the room, was the small single family. You can see there's a lot of green on those. So that was consistent throughout each of the open houses, was more support for seeing more small single family homes. And then the next one over to the right was, so back on the same slide, Bonnie, if you don't mind. So the red dots just to the right of the single family homes were signaling that there was desire to see fewer large single family homes. And then of that matrix on the bottom left is the caretaker dwelling units. And similarly, there was green, a lot of green there saying, yes, we'd like to see more caretaker dwelling units. And as Ellen said, there was a lot of really good discussion about, hey, let's try to make our caretaker dwelling units that we do have work harder to support local and support our local folks from a housing standpoint. And whether that's from an enforcement, whether that's from an increase in size, whether that's from different strategies to make that program be revised in a way to support and house our community. So a lot of green on the caretaker dwelling units. And then the multifamily, which are the either under 10 units or above 10 units, there was mixed and limited support, certainly not significant support for greater than 10 units and mixed support for the less than 10 units. Interesting, you can see in Aspen on the top left, there's that lower middle. Yeah, there was kind of in Aspen, there was saying, yeah, that might be, those large multifamily might be appropriate. And again, that was just respondents who came to the Aspen location to give the feedback. But interesting that, if you live in Aspen, that might be something that you feel like is more appropriate versus some of the other locations. So the question was just broadly, what types, not talking about where, but just what types broadly may be appropriate.
Right. Any questions on that before we move to the next slide? No, okay. Let's go to the next slide.
So then this was using the transect and to Suzanne's kind of point. So the across the top were just the different options of what you could a pin for each of those different housing types. And then folks used a push pin and located that where they thought within the county, within which character zone that type might be appropriate. So you can see really through all of these, a lot of density of those pins closer to within the urban areas and closer to the urban areas. Very few to none in the remote, and a lot of feedback to limit all development in remote areas, limited development in the rural zones, and then support the majority of residential development within established urban growth boundaries. But feedback to allow some small multifamily, especially less than 10 units or smaller in that semi-rural area. And that's that kind of peach color that's just, that's right where Bonnie's cursor is.
Great.
So that was the feedback that we received during the open house through these sessions, and fed into the policy that we will see drafted in the coming slides related to the location of community housing.
And there weren't, there weren't a lot of surprises, I'd say. No surprise that for the most part, people preferred to see the housing within the urban growth boundary areas or the urban areas, but some sentiment for, perhaps some smaller scale housing, some smaller scale multifamily housing even. outside of those urban growth boundary areas, but within close proximity to services, infrastructure. So kind of, where the CGAC was going, and we got some positive feedback, I'd say, in that direction. Here, before we move into the housing policy draft, so we can get into some specifics, we just wanted to remind you to keep in mind that the policies in the plan will be implemented after plan adoption as land use and or energy code amendments, specific actions associated with county plans will be another methodology for implementation. Programs and policies may be adjusted or changed, implemented, and there will be coordination with partner agencies on a regional scale, local and regional scale. So we will dive into implementation further with you in another work session. But just keep in mind, we are going to continue to ask you if there are any policies that you believe should be priorities for implementation for whatever your reasoning may be, so that as we develop that implementation plan, we have some input from you about this has to happen in the near term, or that's something that could perhaps wait, maybe that's 5 years out or 10 years out. So keep that in mind as we do start to move into the policies here. So next slide.
One more.
Yeah, thank you. So the community housing element that's now consolidated in the built environment chapter is divided into 5 subheadings, and we've just labeled them here as A through E. And we'll walk through the policies within all of these areas, but just to identify them now. The first is access to community housing, which speaks to a commitment to increase access, as it suggests, to community housing. The second speaks to the types of community housing opportunities in Pitkin County that should be supported or could be supported. The third speaks to strategies to promote and further the development, funding, understanding of community housing opportunities. And the fourth speaks specifically to location of community housing, identifies criteria for location, and that's one we're going to pay some attention to this evening. And then the last speaks to regional housing partnerships as strategies to support community housing efforts across the region. So that's how this consolidated housing element is set up. And before we do jump, we actually are going to jump into the policies in one more slide, but we wanted to remind you again that what we're hoping that you can do tonight is give us input on, as we go through these policies, where is clarification necessary? Are there policy areas missing? And then again, are there policies that stand out as priorities for implementation? And if you'd like, I do have a couple of sheets here if you want to take notes on this is specific to clarification, missing policies, or policies that are priorities. So I could get out those. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen.
Yeah, so Hannah Hunt's gonna start us off on the specific policies for review.
Yeah, so the first policy is really a broad statement about access to community housing. And this pulls from the language that's within the community housing definition, but really trying to communicate the broad intent throughout this whole section around community housing is to advocate, so specifically says support programs and policies that increase access to community housing in order to promote affordability, accessibility, and long-term availability to support a resilient, inclusive community fabric and maintain opportunities for those who work, contribute to, and call Pitkin County home. So that's the broad statement related to access to community housing. So maybe we just kind of pause here and see, does that jive with you? Does that, you have feedback on that? I'm noting, just as I'm reading this on the slide, it looks like there's a additional community in the last sentence. So we'll make sure that that's cleaned up, but feedback on this broad statement about access to community housing.
I just want to tell you how much I appreciate your adding contribute to. Because I think that we're missing. It's one of the things that bothers me about, concerns me about the extra large homes is that they don't, most people who own them don't contribute to the community in terms of participating and being here for very long. So I'm happy that you added those words.
Any other
Thanks. Great, yeah.
thoughts, comments on this policy? Okay.
So we do have Debbie and Joe on the line. Are y'all okay with this, or do we have any comments? Joe, do you have anything?
Yeah, I share the sentiment that I appreciate the contributed to. But I don't see the distinction between this and affordable housing. Is it the subsidy level? I just don't see it as distinct in what we're doing with two separate definitions that seem very similar.
And I would just speak to that. I mean, the intent here is to say all types of housing, all types of community housing we're supporting, not just affordable housing. I think when we're thinking about that from a how will this be implemented standpoint, we are wanting to be inclusive of all types of community housing that might be private, that's not necessarily deed restricted or supported in a way through either a private developer or existing private home or held with a deed restriction. I think if we use the term affordable housing, then that kind of hones it pretty specifically to just talking about deed restricted or areas that have zoning that allows for affordable housing, like the AH zone. So the intention of having it be community housing at large is really to speak to a lot of different strategies to support housing that are, whether that's from CDUs to existing development, this is captured within that statement. So,
Yeah.
Recognizing it's quite broad, but this is kind of the outset before we hone in with the policies in the next sections.
And
That's the
Joe,
intent, but again, open to, feedback if that feels like off base. And I'll let Ellen jump in.
if I may, so this is also really specifically addressing increasing access to community housing, and it is intended to be inclusive of all types of community housing, including the deed restricted affordable housing. Joe, I understand your comment is on point, that it doesn't call out that deed restricted housing, but it is intended to be inclusive of that.
Yeah, it seems to overlap, perhaps. We could at least have a conceptual or theoretical discussion of what it means to increase access. Would that be an exemption from certain taxes? Would that be access to subsidized finance, both conditional upon, say, full-time residence as defined in some manner, et cetera, et cetera. What do we have in mind here? Not that we would need to stick to anything we said before, or that we would say in this discussion, but can we have a shot at an intent here?
Yeah, I mean, this follows through a lot of what the mill levy was aimed at, right? So this was whether that's supporting subsidies, whether that's supporting public-private partnerships, whether that's funding for senior housing, whether that's support for again the kind of CDU caretaker dwelling units or ADUs. So there's a variety of different ways that this could be actionable and the intent, another piece too of the kind of housing first or the idea of supporting housing before other types of social services, which is consistent with the approach from Pickens County Human Services and Public Health. So it is a broad sentiment, but there's a variety of different strategies, again, from the social services standpoint, from a funding standpoint, from a partnerships and development standpoint, from a supporting of existing development that would all be through lines from this policy statement to a actionable program.
I think, Joe, correct me, if I'm off base in what I understand. That maybe you're asking questions about the actual implementation.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think Joe's like promoting affordability. Now, obviously, we can, if this definition is all encompassing, including employee housing and free market housing. And promoting affordability is obviously really easy. Well, not really easy, but it is controlled within the employee housing market. But, trying to set affordability as a goal for all housing, bringing it up to the free market. In the real estate agents, they haven't been really good at that so far. So I think, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, you're kind of asking what are our, what mechanisms are we using to promote affordability in all the housing, right?
Well, I threw that out there as kind of the easiest to grasp in my puny little mind. This just seems so broad as to really mean anything. And I'd like to tie it down a little bit, even just throwing around some ideas of what we all might think to maybe get at a somewhat narrower set of language. I realize this statement's trying to wrap together a lot of these concepts from a lot of different places in the master plan. I would just like to tighten it up a bit.
If I may, two comments. One is that there are actually some mechanisms identified in policies that we'll be getting to for increasing access to community housing. But I think I'd caution against being too specific in the policy because we don't want to tie the county or any of the county departments to a specific action at this point that may or may not be actionable as a practical matter. So that's just a cautionary note.
Yeah, why don't we see what the other policies are, and then we need to circle back after we see the rest of it.
Okay.
We'll do comment at the end.
I think that's smart, Zach. Yeah, if we think there's something that's not captured here, or this could be honed, it may be helpful to see the rest of them to know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So Ellen, jump to the next, or Bonnie, if you don't mind passing
Just real quick,
changing the slide.
Debbie, do you have something to say?
No, I mean, not just, I kind of agree with the devil's in the details. Let's move into more of the details, and I'm sure I'll have some questions at that point.
Okay.
So, thank you.
right. So, okay, I'll take this one. So, oh, okay.
One comment.
Well, it just seems like,
Sorry, could you,
I'm sorry.
your name?
Evan Gull.
Thank you.
And we have been here before to discuss the CDU size issues and have two sons that are born and raised here. reading that at that level. I know right now the way the CDUs are, there are two ways to qualify. And I'm totally comfortable with both, and one is APTA, another is family. And when I read this one, I'm saying they are, neither would be very likely to be employed in any Pitkin County business at this point in their lives. But they would definitely, I believe from my own experience, contribute to the community in other ways. That's why when I read these and I put "and" between them, I'm just bringing out that as a question. Probably unlikely to change, but the way it reads, it's a little bit, the higher level conflicts with the current details. That's all. Thank you for
Thank you.
letting me talk now.
Go ahead, Owen.
And we will get to some specifics about caretaker dwelling unit changes that may be appropriate based on policies in the plan. But first, the next subheading,
Oh, sorry, hold on 1 second.
oh,
Jamie Goal is online and raised his hand at this point.
do you want to take?
Yeah, sure.
I have to go to pick up my toddler. My dad Evan just spoke. I wish I could stick around for the CDU section, but just wanted to say thank you and thanks for engaging. And clearly the feedback we've sent in has been listened to, so it's much appreciated. But I have to go, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this next section speaks to a diversity of housing types. It's the first 3.2 is a broad policy statement. No, you can
Sorry.
go back. That's all right.
I didn't mean to click on that. One more back.
Um,
Come on, there we go.
There we go. So the first 3.2 is just a broad policy statement, again, about expanding availability and supply of community housing, really promoting strategies to expand the supply of affordable, diverse, and desirable housing types to support stable and long-term community housing opportunities for a range of individuals and families. The second is about preserving existing community housing. We've heard a lot about this from the CJAC and others in the community, making sure that we preserve and maintain affordable and attainable deed-restricted and free market community housing where it currently exists. We really don't want to see that housing disappear. And those housing types exist in locations throughout the unincorporated and incorporated Pitkin County. The third policy is about supporting the maintenance and replacement of that existing community housing, recognizing that, again, this is speaking to both free market and deed restricted homes in order to continue to house local residents and promote affordability. There may be some need, Joe, to help. I don't know what that looks like, if it's funding, if it's tax credits. I'm not sure how we'd get there, but it is a policy intended to support maintenance and replacement of that existing housing. And then the 03.5 speaks to providing incentives for conversion of existing free market housing to deed restricted housing, again, to accommodate local workforce and promote long-term affordability. And I think this is speaking to the concept of buy downs, which is something that have been pursued and continue to be pursued as one means of trying to accommodate local workforce housing without, and the benefit of this is that it's not new development. All of these are looking at existing development rather than development that would result in additional growth, right?
Is the North 40 deed restricted?
The North 40, it's been a long, my recollection is it was resident, it was RO, it was resident occupancy, which is, it is a deed restriction, but it's relatively lenient compared to other APSHA, deed restrictions. In my recollection.
Yeah, I think parts, I'm not sure if it's a mix, but I know most of it is RO, which is like highest
There's no income.
income. Yeah,
There's no income cap, but you have to be a working
yeah,
resident.
yeah.
I can speak to that since I lived there. It's all RO. And, but some of the lots and builds were restricted to not go above a certain amount. There's 12 that are a little bit cheaper. The rest of the lots were, anyone could build whatever they could within the size restraint, and the design restraints for any amount of money. So a lot of people, there was a lot of contractors and architects that built really nice homes that are now being resold for around $2 million. So, which is actually cheaper than Smuggler. But anyway, yeah, and then there's the townhouses, that were all, everyone started at whatever they built for, and the townhouses had a price on them. And then, you know, because we've been there now for 22, 23 years, you know, it's adding up, just that extra we get every year, so.
Yeah, so you're welcome. So if we can, unless there are questions, oh, here we go. We are on the right slide. Thank you. So this is a continuation of that subheading, diversity of housing types, policies, and 03.6 is a policy that speaks directly to the caretaker dwelling units as a means of supporting community housing. As I said, we heard a lot about enforcing the use and occupancy of existing caretaker dwelling units to ensure that they are serving the purpose they were intended to serve and housing local workforce primarily, at least being occupied rather than sitting vacant or being used as a wine room, wine cellar. The second bullet there is, I'm sorry, the first A does speak to enforcing use and occupancy of existing CDUs, but it also speaks to enforcing deed restrictions and placing deed restrictions on new units, caretaker dwelling units, which currently have new caretaker dwelling units, do have a deed restriction, but this is suggesting that it perhaps be a little more stringent. The second bullet, and this speaks a little bit to what Joe was talking about, suggests the promotion and promoting the creation and utilization of new deed restricted CDUs through the county by streamlining the land use and permit process. And this is a broad term, but removing barriers to creating new CDUs. So what does that look like? To be determined. That will take some work in the land use code, but this is the policy direction to go there. The third bullet says, and again relating to CDUs, require adequate availability of a legal and physical water supply as a standard for the development of caretaker dwelling units. Several of these may be built in the rural portions of the county that are on wells. So wells, the water, provision of water, adequacy of a legal and water and wet water supply is going to be an element that will have to be dealt with in those rural areas on well permits. In some cases, the well permits will allow for a CDU, and others they may not. So that's going to be a consideration. And then this last bullet D, I guess that is bullet, suggests implementing a land use code standard allowing CDUs to contain up to 1,500 square feet of floor area. That as I said, we've gotten a fair amount of feedback on that need to accommodate, to better accommodate young families. 03.7 suggests is a policy supporting enabling on-site job-related housing for workforce. We have some provision for that in the land use code today, but this is really looking at it on a broader scale, perhaps, in order to reduce traffic intensity, related greenhouse gas emissions associated with travel to and from employment on site. So the last 03.8 is specific to on-site housing to support local agriculture. Again, the land use code addresses this today, but this is just policy to further support perhaps further strategies to support on-site housing for ag producers, to encourage the current and next generation to achieve local agricultural production, local food production. Again, we have gotten a fair bit of input in that direction. And then the last slide on diversity of housing types speaks to a need for housing for older adults. Develop resources to support diverse housing and living opportunities for older adults. And again, this is Joe, this is not specific as to how specific strategies, but it does suggest developing resources for support.
The how is the implementation process. Right?
Yeah, correct. That is something that we can give a little more detail to in the implementation action items, how we get there. And this is just basically the broad policy to get us there. And I'm going to turn this one back over to Hannah Hunt, unless there are other questions. I mean, I don't want to move too quickly through this. What do you think that the policies here are clear? Do they need clarification? Is there anything specific missing? And or I guess at the end we can ask if you want to go back to what you consider to be priorities for implementation there. But perhaps we can move to the next section and then come back to walk through. We have a few more slides to get through, and then perhaps we can come back to priorities for implementation. So Hannah Hunt is gonna, unless you have questions, I don't want to rush you. Sorry. Are you ready to move? Okay, let's move on then. Thank you.
Okay, so this topic area C is related to mechanisms in support community housing. So a variety of different strategies. 3.10 is specifically flagging funding for community and affordable housing. So establishing diverse mechanisms to fund community and affordable housing to ensure that residents of all income and ages and stages of life can live and thrive locally. This would also be, for example, in support of the mill levy that was passed. So this would be related to those different strategies that are moving forward through different programs at the county. 3.11 is related to the evaluation of housing needs. Currently, Pitkin County is working with City of Aspen, Town of Snowmass Village, Town of Basalt on a housing needs assessment. And this is just kind of acknowledging a policy to participate. Again, that's a specific example, but with adjacent jurisdictions to better understand and plan for housing needs with our municipal partners. 3.12, affordable housing mitigation. So this policy is about mitigating the impacts to the workforce by providing employee housing for workforce development generated by development activity. That's a kind of direct line from an implementation standpoint of the employee housing impact fees. So this policy would be supporting employee housing impact fees. This is a policy that's been carried forward. Innovative building for community housing. This is something that was definitely a topic of discussion for the growth committee, but was recognizing that for community housing, encouraging, incentivizing, and support energy conservation and high building performance for community housing to both reduce construction costs and operating costs. An example of this, again, I'm kind of adding the additional context from an implementation, but an example of this, like the Basalt Vista for example, that was a partnership with Habitat for Humanity that were net zero development. So recognizing that there can be some synergies for both affordable housing and also support for high performance buildings that have low operating costs for their occupants. And let's see, is there, so that's all of the policies related to that mechanisms to support community housing. So I'll stay there, and then same questions just on that previous slide. Any clarifications there, or anything seemed missing?
Susan?
In 03.12, where we talk about the payment of an in lieu fee,
Mm-hmm.
I just think that stinks. And I don't think it's gotten us anywhere. In fact, I think it has set us back as a county in trying to, as I recall, the first land use code, or even the Green Book, talked about development paying its own way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard to do, of course, and the bigger the house gets, the harder it is for it. We end up paying as a community, as I see it. The people who benefit are the people who built the house and live in it sometimes. But to allow on-site, instead of that owner having to promise and to build his own housing, employee housing on site, telling him he can just give us money. We can't do anything with the money. We don't have the land. That person ought to be out looking for the land to place it. So if we could just get rid of in lieu fees, I would be joyful.
Okay, well good comment, understood. I will only note that, the statement 03.12 is qualified, at the end by saying on-site deed restricted housing is preferred to payment of an in lieu fee in circumstances where a site can accommodate an additional unit or units.
Find that where a site can accommodate an additional unit. That should not be up to me or anybody else in the community to decide whether that,
So,
Yeah,
the house ought to be smaller.
And-
If you need to build your affordable housing.
good,
We just let so many people get by with that.
so, yeah,
I mean, I completely agree. I mean, in lieu fees. Yes, if the housing should be mitigated. In real life housing, because the fees can never catch up with the cost of construction.
mm-hmm,
I've heard this from people in the construction industry, and every quarter, the cost to mitigate that housing, those in lieu fees. Are based on even if they're adjusted quarterly or monthly, they can never mitigate completely, and they can never catch up with the real life cost of building that unit, having someone live there. And if they cannot accommodate an additional unit, then they should mitigate the size of their home
I agree.
to make room for a unit. And whether that's commercial mitigating for a development of a hotel or a residential home, affordable housing mitigation should be, and it used to be done on site a lot more, and then everybody now just pays the fee because they know it's cheaper. And if you ask a developer, you ask a builder, you ask a homeowner that's building really anything, whether it's commercial development or residential, a business, but they will always pay the in lieu fees because they know that the real life cost of building those units is substantially more.
Yeah, and it's worthless money.
mm-hmm.
We can't do anything with it.
So let me see if I can clarify. I think those are excellent points. I think what you're saying is that, what we should say is that the housing should either be accommodated on site. In some cases, that would require a reduction in house size to accommodate a second unit. And or are you suggesting that rather than paying the county an in lieu fee, that housing, the developer would be responsible for finding housing offsite?
Well, for a
And
while,
paying
I know
for-
in the city of Aspen, that's been done, like, I
Mhm.
know for a while, the project that is being developed up by 1A. I know that they had, this was years and years ago, but they had some sort of contractual agreement to buy the tennis courts, right?
Yep,
The tennis club, because
Sure.
they were gonna buy part of that and mitigate and put their housing there. Just, that's fine too. And if a bunch of developers or builders wanna get together and buy some lots somewhere else and bank it and do it all together, that's more cost efficient, but it has to be done in real actual beds, right? Like, not like money that we get and then that the county gets, and then there's nowhere to build housing. And so we just mitigated for nothing, and we got nothing.
And we've made the problem worse.
great comments, Kara. I'm not gonna put you on the spot, but I know Kara has been working on on the housing mitigation fee, so she might have some words of wisdom to offer.
I think they're great thoughts, and maybe what I would recommend, so I would say that right or wrong, but we were able to purchase Phillips and Save a Trailer Home Park because of the housing mitigation fee, so there has been some really good things that is available because
Do
of,
you know of another one?
yeah, and we put in with Crystal Vista because of it. We've been able to do a lot up until last year with our ballot. The housing mitigation fee was the only way the county was able to participate in housing. So we have been able to do some really good things in there. I think what I would suggest maybe for you all to consider, and I think it's a great conversation, is that on-site deed restricted is preferred over in lieu and should be, really prioritized over in lieu. I think the other piece that I'm realizing is not captured in here that has been talked about both through the growth committee and the board is talking about too, is capturing more of housing mitigation. So the remodels, for example, is how are we capturing the employee generation on that redevelopment that's happening, because we're not seeing as much of it on the new development, right? And so is there opportunities within the redevelopment? And in that redevelopment, there's not as much for the on-site housing, but then, how do you all see that as an opportunity to be looking at the affordable
Yeah, I mean,
housing?
in the remodels, sort of, they get under the radar, right, on that, which is a good point. I guess what my question would be is, and this is like a bigger conversation on employee housing, right? And mitigation for employee housing. Is in the trailer court that's amazing, right? And those opportunities are great. Those opportunities are, there's no other trailer courts left. Like, there's no other Burlingame site, right? That's done. They're for a big, large, however many units out there, or North 40 or whatever, all those, the big, easy, like, obvious opportunities for get housing, employee housing are gone. And so then the only newer opportunities are the county needs to get things smaller and more creative in places that they might have overlooked outside the urban growth boundary, wherever that might be, right? And the solution now is finding more creative, smaller solutions where we're like, hey, we can put 10 units here. or we can put 5 units here because the 5 is better than 0. And that there might be a point coming up where that in lieu money, you don't have anywhere to put it. There are less Phillips trailer, there's less opportunity for that. And in retrospect, you might have wanted the beds, like, and to have the developer or the builder or whoever just mitigate that and build that for you, and you don't have to worry about construction costs going up 20%, steel, drywall, like all that stuff. And that's just, taken care of for you. But I mean, you'd know better, but that's my thought, is like in a 30,000 foot view, like the big opportunities are, if they were there, we already would have looked into them.
Absolutely. I think you can work on language that really reaffirms, I think what you're saying is like, let's be sure that we're prioritizing and like, are there exploring the other strategies, whether like where you're going, is it, smaller size to accommodate the on-site employee mitigation? I think I would just caution is you don't want to take the in lieu off the table as an option. I think you just want to make it really clear in lieu should be the last option versus on-site or even reduced size, but we definitely don't want to remove that as an option and as one of the tools in the toolbox, right?
In the way that in lieu is calculated right now, how is that designed? Like, how's that calculation or that algorithm? How is that designed to try to keep up with current costs? Is that updated?
Yep.
Annually, and there's
Yeah.
an escalator in it, and and at the board's direction, we are looking at even changing it up a little bit more right now. As far as looking at that methodology to keep up and also pace it with the redevelopment and remodels.
So what if we had an option where if somebody wanted to mitigate with in lieu, it was like 120%. Right? Of construction costs.
Yeah.
So if they wanted to go that route, they absolutely wanted to go that route, there was some sort of,
Cushion. Yeah.
a cushion there for the county for the fact that land prices or development price, construction price in 2028 is going to might be whatever more than than the formula even can account for. And maybe that then drives people, gives them more opportunity to mitigate in real housing. It's like,
When you have all the money in the world,
but 120% doesn't matter. Yeah, it's like whatever, you're just gonna pay it. Yeah.
yeah, just make it easy.
Yep.
You don't. I just think increasingly, it's a bad joke. That we are, now, I understand what you just said about Phillips and about this stuff. And it would make me feel better to see more numbers on there. To see how much we have left over, where some of that has been spent. But then I think that Zach's comments about, and he knows more than I do, on a daily, weekly basis of how costs are going up. I don't think we can ever keep up with it. And we're dealing with people that have, I remember somebody wanting to build years ago on the backside of Aspen Mountain, down fairly low, but had a long driveway. And because there was concern about maintaining it, she bought $100,000 bulldozer or whatever to do her own work. It just takes us into the realm of make-believe, I think. And I'm happy to hear that something comes from it. But there's no. Sorry.
Well, what I what I would share, and as you're looking at it from the comp plan and this policy point is, and we can bring the information back, but the other element that has been successful in the mitigation fees, right, is not only the Phillips and the Basalt Vistas, but we have been able to buy down various units in the community. And so there is a nexus of where there's development in rural areas, we're buying down units and providing affordable housing within Aspen, within the Basalt corridor, probably the primary ones. And so we're putting the employee housing units then in more of those urban areas versus in the rural, right? And so that's where I say all of this is about all the toolbox that we're looking at. And I think you all are on the right track, especially because now we have the affordable housing, the property tax. It definitely is enabling the county to be a partner and look at things that we haven't, to exactly what you're saying, that we haven't been able to, because housing mitigation alone is not the way that we can solve the housing, right? And so being able to make sure that that preference and some language around that the on-site housing is preference, that I think language that you all are looking at of, you know, not just where a site, you know, what that the site can accommodate, and if it shouldn't, then maybe the site should actually be
Right.
rethought
Right.
so that it can accommodate. I think that's really strong language. And I don't disagree by any means. I'm just saying, and there are still circumstances where the fee in lieu is definitely a tool that we want in the toolbox, and it does play into how we're addressing all of the community housing needs.
So,
You know, especially right now, and I'll say, I know it's too late for me to say, I'm not gonna belabor this. Because I already
No, it's a
have.
great discussion.
that's why we're here.
But in the context of what we're going through with the comprehensive plan and what the Citizen Growth Committee did, to think that when somebody builds a 25,000 square foot house,
Not allowed anymore.
that's true. That's bad. Maybe we're a little late talking about this. But you build a bigger house and we know now all of the damage that it does for the rest of us, how we pay for it. We pay because of what we breathe, we pay because of the mental stress, we pay because of the intensity that the growth committee recognized. And that you couldn't give up a little piece of land on something that you're gonna build a 9,200 square foot house on. When, I mean, who should be expected to pay because you developed that? It shouldn't be me. No, it should not be me. And I'm Kara, you're smart and you have the information to back up the things that you say. And so I will listen to you further, and I'd love to get more information from you, but this, who benefits and who pays? I'm tired of seeing people have to pay.
So,
Development should pay its own way.
thank you. I'm great. That's great input, and we will work on revising this 03.12 to reflect the conversation, and we'll work with Kara to make sure that we've got all the information we need to make it a policy that will function and achieve the goals, you know, that we intend to achieve or want to achieve. So
Okay.
that's great. It's a
Can I
great-
make one quick comment before we transition out?
Go ahead, Joe.
I think on-site is problematic here, is that increases transportation because that puts workers away from jobs unless they're caretakers, which are just serving the owner anyway and benefiting the owner further. The second comment is on 311, evaluation of housing needs. I'd like to see included in that discussion of housing constraints. whether that's adjacency to UGB or access to sewer, water, services, transportation, because I feel strongly those things need to be kept in balance.
We do, Joe, I hear what you're saying. And the housing needs assessment is actually something that's required by the state. I think that's what we're looking at, and they have some specific criteria that we'll be working with, but
I always hit the state constraints. I'm sorry. You always educate me about them.
but we do in the next, under the next heading that we'll be covering, don't need to go to the next slide yet, but we do speak about the location of community housing and specifically how it relates to infrastructure, transit, and establishing criteria to make sure that we are getting housing ideally in the locations that we believe to be appropriate in the unincorporated portion of the county specifically. So there is policy that is specific to your point. I don't know if you want to, before we get into those policies, are you suggesting that 3.11 should be revised to not just refer to housing needs, but housing needs as they relate to, help me here.
So behind my concern is my own view that whether we like it or not, this valley is going to get built out. And we can affect the rate at which it gets built out and the direction through which it gets built out. But it's just seems like it's going to happen. And eventually, probably before we fill every piece of land, we'll run out of water and power and other things needed to build it out. So we'll hit some natural constraints here. And can there be a realization of what those are so that we know when we hit them or know when we're approaching them and be able to plan for that?
Yeah, Hannah Hunt, you're familiar with that state, with the state no, Kara's gonna jump in, I
Sorry, I'm
guess.
just nodding. I mean, I think that while there's a state program at the policy level, you can add the constraint, you can add language here. I think it's acknowledging there's a formalized state housing needs process, but with or without a state process, there still is something that we would want at the local level.
Yeah. Okay,
Debbie has a comment.
Sure.
Debbie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that I definitely agree with having the cash in lieu program be made less desirable, in whatever way we can do that, as far as, increasing the rates, or, if a unit can be built there, that's the preferred, or, just whatever we can do. And yeah, just to kind of keep that from happening. Although it was great to hear from Kara that that money has been doing a lot of good throughout the county. So, but yeah, let's increase those fees. And so, I know there's people who will just pay because they can, but let's see if we can get them to actually pay for what the impacts that they're creating.
thanks, and I was just handed another question here. It's where does land cost fit into in lieu fees? Is it a consideration? Because land costs are going up like construction is the concern.
The payment in lieu fee is paid at building permit and I'm like, I should talk to other people in the room. Building permit and is based on the valuation of the buildings.
So no land,
No land.
no land. That's a bigger problem, I think.
That's pretty big.
Especially with, your comments about all the sites for larger projects going away.
Yeah, and
I mean, that's one of the big advantages of CDU.
Mhm.
Yep.
That's so true. Thank you.
What
Okay,
does, cause the city has gone through a bunch of neat. Like they've had private developers build employee housing. That they've then been able to sell like those units as credits back to developers, right? Has the county contemplated, I mean, and is that system still being used or has it been abandoned? And has there been any like of those alternative, credit-based systems or a private developer that the county has contemplated?
It's funny, I was reflecting after Suzanne said she wasn't gonna belabor and was thinking about other options. And the housing credit came up. So the growth committee did recommend looking at partnering with the city on their credit program. One of the conversation was, we don't want to create a secondary. From the growth committee, it was not wanting to create a secondary because we wanted to partner so that those units would be built again more in urban areas. So I think it's definitely something. I don't think it has been brought forward, like it is something that we can look at and bring back forward as another mechanism to evaluate is, the county exploring that housing
Yeah.
credit. I'll be very honest, there's others in the room that can speak more of the ins and outs that make it work and what it would take, but I think having a policy, again, kind of where you all are going and what I'm hearing is we want to put and make development pay their way. Payment in lieu has not been the way that we want them to pay their way. We want them to actually take the lift of building this and finding what are those mechanisms available?
Sure.
okay.
Awesome.
Now,
That is-
please realize wherever you put this housing mitigation charge, you're going to drive up housing costs on one side of that and further drive up house values, costs, and reduce affordability in order to reduce it on the other side. You're just going to drive a wedge in this between these two layers of the housing market, or three if you want to include community housing. But please be cognizant that that's the unavoidable economic effect here to drive up housing costs somewhere.
Absolutely, and just I think we know that that's happening, just so everyone knows, the mitigation fee today only is applied at above 5750, so above that 5750 exemption as an effort to balance those costs. Not saying that it does completely, but that's been the intention along the way of that breaking point.
Right. So great conversation, Zach. I'm not gonna try to run.
Please.
But really great conversation. Thank you. And we need to do some work, obviously. And we will bring back some revised language and work with Kara again to make sure that we're on point. So great comments and yeah, we have some work to do there. Anything else on this section before we move to the next? All right, so the next set of policies, thanks, really relate specifically to the open houses that we've just recently hosted and really speak to the location of community housing specifically, with consideration for urban growth boundaries. And we've covered some of this already, but 03.14A really is just forwarding the existing priority in the land use code today for locating community housing within urban growth boundary areas, prioritizing adding density to existing development, opportunities for new development to increase the supply of the housing within the UGBs where transit, services, job centers, and infrastructure are already established. So that will remain as a policy in the comprehensive plan, being carried forward from what's in the land use code today. The land use code also somewhat covers, B, community housing outside of urban growth boundaries. The land use code today does allow for or speak to some potential for housing outside of urban growth boundary areas. But we have, partly based on the input we've received over the last year and at the open houses, we have tried, and from CGAC, we've tried to define some criteria. We have defined some criteria for where that housing outside of UGBs may be appropriate. And so this, I think you have seen this criteria before, but it's important to make sure that you think we've got it right. That first arrow, the arrow below B, for community housing outside of UGBs, says enable added density to existing development and opportunities for new development to increase the supply of community housing outside of established UGBs under the following criteria: adjacent to or within an existing community water system or municipal water district service area, with an available and reliable water supply and capacity to serve additional units. We've over the course of the last year done a lot of work that's made it clear that water should be is a very critical enabling and limiting factor for where housing should be located. So that is first and foremost a critical criteria that's been defined here. Roman numeral 2 says, housing outside of UGB within close proximity to transportation corridors or transit. We did some work on this. Initially, we said, well, should it be within a quarter mile, a half mile? And decided that that's some detail that we'll probably want to work through in the land use code. But we recognize that close proximity to transportation corridors or transit is a critical element to another one that was defined or identified by the CGAC. And then, as important, location, we wanted housing to be in locations that avoid the presence of natural hazards, wildlife habitat. Again, we're looking at preserving that natural environment and rural character, and being cognizant that we don't want to develop housing in floodplain areas ideally, or avalanche hazard areas, etc. And then housing of a site appropriate density and scale, including typologies such as small single family, that was the 3250 and smaller, small scale attached units, or cluster development of up to 10 dwelling units. I think that's what you were referring to, Zach. But with the caveat that new high density development is not appropriate in rural areas of the county where there's an insufficient level of infrastructure or absence of services to support such development. So that is the criteria that was specified for location of community housing. And I think it's really been based on the input we've received in these open houses. There's been some confirmation that criteria is appropriate and is the policy that we want to have in the comprehensive plan. But we really need to hear from you as to whether you think, is there something missing here? Does it need clarification? So before we move to the next, I will ask you to weigh in on that. And we've got one more slide after this, and then we're through the policies. So we're doing well. I don't want to rush you.
I wouldn't recommend a change to that. I didn't make any notes about that.
Right. Anybody, any other, Joan?
Is
Right.
community water system a defined term?
Good question. I don't believe we have it defined. Hannah Hunt, you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong there, but we should, that's a good call. We should, probably should define it.
Yeah, it's not specifically defined in our definitions that are within this section, but it is a term within the water system that is meaningful in that it relates to a water service district that is larger than that serves a certain district, and a metro district is an example of that kind of community water system. So it's a technical term related to the water system services that are housed within the county, but we can make sure that that's clarified.
So is that like the Woody Creek Metro District?
An example of that is the Woody Creek Metro District, yes.
But that would not be a well that's shared among, say, 3 or 5 houses, right?
There's some distinction there, correct? Yeah.
Okay. I am aware that the Woody Creek Metro District is facing some constraint issues. Can we have language in here relating to the ability and willingness of the district, of the system to be able to accept the development?
If I may jump in, so the language does say, adjacent to or within a community water system with an available and reliable water supply and capacity to serve additional units. Is that?
Yeah, that letter I speaks to, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that sufficient, Joe?
That probably does it. As long as we have a defined term for community water system, it seems like it ticks all the boxes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
But the intention is just what you have shared, that we're making sure, because we're aware of, as a part of the water conditions report, we surveyed all the metro districts and heard just that, Joe, that many of them do not have capacity or would need some additional sources to be able to further support. So we're aware that that is a limitation, kind of back to your comment about natural limitations. We're certainly aware that that's something that is we will run up against, and want to make sure that that's clearly detailed within this policy to recognize that that's going to be some piece that's a limiting factor related to this type of development.
Great. Any other comments, questions before we move to the last policy section within as part of our discussion tonight? Anybody?
Just make, these are all great goals. This is one of those situations where we really have to zone it like we mean it, right? Because I'm just looking at this, and every single one of these is the opposite of what the larger market forces and market demands for Pickens County are. Like, if you like, the demand right now for Pickens County is someone wants a ranch out in the middle of nowhere where the elk are on their lawn. They want to build 12,000 square feet and a barn and a guest house, which no one's allowed to live in, which is not, no employees are allowed to live in, but they want to have it be considered, deed restricted, but then not, and no enforcement mechanism.
Right.
So their, nephew who owns a hedge fund can live in the guest house and be considered that's deed restricted. So like all of these, small clustered units, that is not where the market demand is. Wildlife habitat, everybody wants to be somewhere where like I said, the elk are in their lawn. So there's a water supply, all of that. I mean, like a lot of these communities like Starwood and West Buttermilk has their own metro district and their own water service, and Starwood does, but there's a these
Mhm.
goals are gonna come very hard up against what the market demands are. And so unless it's zoned, we really zone it like we mean it, that these goals aren't, we can make it easier for people to achieve these goals, but yeah, that's, that's where we're coming up against what the market demand is, right? So there's, how do we really promote small scale multi-unit buildings? How do we really promote buildings within the, development within urban growth boundaries when all the demand is the complete opposite in Pickens County?
Well, that's why the Board of County Commissioners appointed the Citizens Growth Committee
Yeah.
to work on those issues. And now what we're hearing, I think I'm hearing this correctly, is that the Community Growth Committee that included developers, real estate agents,
Yep,
assessors,
everybody.
across the board are agreeing with what people are in the neighborhoods are now saying they agree with. This has continued. It surprises me every time. And we were working years ago on the Down Valley Master Plan, and I thought, think of dealing in Old Snowmass with the environmentalists and the ranchers, and who are gonna be completely opposed.
Sure.
Sitting down at ranchers' kitchen tables and talking to them. What I found is that we all agree.
Yeah.
We want the same things. That's why most of us came here, and we are still holding on to that. And if other people who want something different, they can they'll know about this when they come in.
Mhm.
And if they want something different, they can go somewhere else.
There's always bail.
That's right.
Yeah, but-
On the highway.
I don't think we can put that in the comp plan.
All right,
I
no.
mean,
I recommend language.
I think there is already a buffer. That's a good, but thank you. That's a good observation, and I think it's practical reality and that we need to be aware of,
Yeah.
acknowledge, right?
It's never easy, but I'm so happy that we keep pushing for it and sticking to a plan that supports our goals and stated values. With this,
Speaking as a citizen, quickly
Yes.
on this, we've been too successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess,
I mean,
it's what I guess what I'm getting at is any loophole when this turns into code, any loophole will be exploited to as quick as possible to the maximum amount until we have the time to change it. I know it takes a long time to change code, so that's what I'm
Mhm.
getting at, yeah.
I would also say that's a good flag as you start to think about, and I know staff and Ellen and Hannah are working on it, but also, what are you thinking about when you see the implementation plan as it relates to this? Because there might be opportunities where you all can direct to be stronger if you so wish in that implementation plan.
Yeah.
To follow up on this conversation.
That's what I think we're all pulling at the reins to get
Yeah.
to. Let's get to the
Rubber hits the
implement,
road.
yeah.
Yeah.
Great, so, yeah, there's just one more, slide relating to policy that Hannah Hunt's gonna cover, and then we're gonna wrap up, with next steps, so.
So
Take it
this,
away.
great, thanks, Ellen. So this final piece is capturing the policies that were previously within the regional approach chapter, again, consolidating them into this one. So support for regional housing programs. This is about supporting, so I'll say supporting flexible, resilient workforce. Talks about advocating for our local and regional housing programs through supporting workforce mobility, not just workforce, but mobility, regional housing goals, and coordination across municipalities. So City of Aspen, Snowmass Village, Basalt, and then adjacent counties. So that's that first really kind of broad support for regional programs. 316 is identifying both with municipalities as well as private partners, remaining opportunities, kind of to the point about what are creative solutions where they may exist within UGB, within existing UGB of Aspen and Basalt, and within municipal boundaries. So partnering with jurisdictions, that's a focus on development within municipalities and UGBs. 317, engaging private developers, both for solutions, but also incentives. So strategizing with private developers to identify private public partnerships and increase strategies to support community housing in the region. And I'll just say through the open houses, there have been some pretty interesting ideas that have come up about ways to engage with private developers and think about market solutions for housing. So some interesting things there potentially from an implementation standpoint. And then leading into the last one, creative partnerships. So both formal as well as informal community networks with housing advocacy organizations to nurture creative partnerships, identify bold solutions to increase access to housing. So that's the suite of those 4 policies that get at regional housing partnerships.
Any thoughts, any comments, clarifications, missing pieces on this specific topic area, or good to go?
No, one thing that I wanted to mention though is the new Benedict Senior Housing in Glenwood Springs, when we were talking about partnerships, because that started with money that was left by the Benedicts in their wills, I think $2 million to build affordable housing somewhere. And that was 30 years ago, and people kept trying and trying. Finally, it has gotten built through a partnership of people in the state organizations who are promoting affordable housing and such. And that's 34 units for seniors, low income seniors. One other note, and I don't know where this came up, I think in the sort of a preface, Hannah Hunt, was the mention of public health being related to housing, having housing available.
Right.
If we can find a way to stress that a little bit more, because I think the availability or the non-availability of housing has to do with, has a close connection to physical health and certainly to mental health in the valley.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good note. Thank you.
Joe Mason, comments?
I've heard rumblings that due to budget constraints and also various opinions locally, there's decreased support for regional support for Down Valley communities, and I'd be careful about that. Want to feel that out a bit. The 317, engaging private developers. I feel very strongly about developer and contractor quality in this valley for various personal reasons I've experienced in the last couple of years. We really don't have a good contractor licensing process. We rely upon the city of Aspen, and the contractors themselves laugh at that process. So if we're going to start engaging with private developers, we need some quality control process layered upon this. That might be implementation based, but I feel we should put some limiting language in here up front so that people who are dodgy don't come streaming in trying to get money.
Right. That does sound like something that perhaps could be included as part of an implementation discussion. Not sure, I'm not quite sure how that would be, how that would play out, but it's definitely a good, something to consider.
You know, we might have bits of this in helping with maintenance for deed restricted housing and things like that, because I get the sense that one of the biggest problems of getting any maintenance done is finding somebody of reasonable quality who's not just going to bilk you, which is getting harder and harder to do in this valley. So it might be part of its own initiative, at least stated generally.
You've been slacking off.
Okay. All right, good. That's a good, a good point. Thank you. I think if there's nothing else, yeah, we're just gonna move to next steps and wrap this up. It's just after 7. We want to get you out of here. So, that we plan to come back to you in another work session on November 18th to cover the last 2 policy specific chapters of the plan. And then we'll come back to you in December again. And we're still deciding whether we're going to have plan revisions ready at that meeting, and or whether we'll be diving into the implementation plan or both. But so we'll plan to come back in December again after that November 18th meeting. And then just to go to the next slide, Hannah Hunt and I will be compiling in late fall, I guess that's where we are, January, February 2026. We will compile all of the community feedback into a final draft comprehensive plan, and then refer it out to caucuses, municipalities, land managers, counties, and set a public hearing for P&Z review and adoption of a final draft comprehensive plan, to be followed by Board of County Commissioners approval. And then the intent is to come back winter, spring of 2026 to initiate the code update process. So that's where we are. That's where we're going. That's all we have, unless you have anything to add. We can wrap it up.
This used to seem so far away. We're probably getting there when we were young.
So Debbie just,
She
okay.
just gonna be lost her internet, so.
Oh, good timing. Okay.
Awesome. Well, I guess if we don't have anything else, I'd take a motion to adjourn. All right, adjourn. Thank you, guys.
Almost 40, but also just in case you want a little bit of swag, we do have some pens. Picken County Vision 2025.
2050.
Huh?
2050.
Did I say 2025?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where we are today, 25th, Vision 2050. Pins, if you'd like to wear them or have one. And we also have some stickers about the visions, right? So you do, okay. All right. So